I know in elementary school you've compared decimals before, but now in middle school we're going to throw in negative decimals. So here are some things to remember. Positive decimals are like money that you have. So for example, if we had 2 6/10, well, in terms of money, that is kind of like you having $2.60. We can add a 0 to the back of that, right? So that's like you have $2.60. Negative decimals are like money that you owe. So when you owe money, we're talking about debt. Debt means you owe money. It's the money that you owe. An example of that, let's say we had negative 1 258 thousandths. Now, in terms of money, money usually stops 2 spaces behind the decimal. So this is kind of like you owe $1.25, but because there's an 8 behind the 5, it bumps the 5 to a 6. So this is similar to you owing $1.26. Okay, so when you have a negative amount, it's like you owe money. So this is like you owe $1.26. Now, what you have to remember with negatives is that the larger the negative, the more you owe, so the worse the amount. So you don't want a large negative. A large negative is a bad thing, okay? Negatives are like money that you owe. It can also be seen as points that you lose, right? So the larger the negative, the more points you're losing. The smaller the negative, the less points. So you want the smaller negative. The smaller the negative, the better, okay? The larger the negative, the worse. Negative numbers on a number line, when you're going from negative towards the positive, when you're going this way, the numbers are getting larger, right? So as you're going this way, this is like you owe 10, but then you owe 9, which is better, then you owe 8, which is better, and so forth, until you pass the 0, and then you have $1, you have $2, you have 3. So as you go towards the right, your numbers get larger. When you're going towards the left, your numbers get smaller. So the positive numbers start to get smaller, and then when you get to the negative side, the negative number starts to get bigger, but that means you have less. So when you're going this way, your numbers are getting smaller, or you have less. Okay, you have less and less as you're going this way. Let's do some examples. Says Ridge and West were trying to put the following numbers in order from least to greatest, which means the worst amount to the best amount. Least is the worst amount, greatest is the best amount. So when you're looking at these amounts, pretend they're money. Which ones are your worst amounts? Well, if you're talking about the least, you should focus on the 2 negatives. Now think of it in terms of money. This is like you owe $5.02. This is like you owe $5 and you can add a 0 there, 90 cents. Which one's worse? Well, of course, owing more money is worse. So this one's your least amount. So you're going to put negative 5 9/10. And then the second worst amount is owing $5.02, right? So that's the second. Okay. Now, it should be getting better each time because you're going from least to greatest, worst to best. So then between these two, which one's better? Okay, now in terms of money, it looks like it's 570, and then you can add a 0 here. It's also 570, but then behind this number there's a 1, and behind this number there's another 0. So 700 is less than 701. So then our next smallest number is 5 7/10, and then the largest number is 5 701 thousandths. So that's our answer for the first example. Second example. Put the following numbers in order from greatest to least. Greatest to least would mean the best amount to the worst amount. So now we're looking at the best amount, the greatest amount. So we're not going to start with negatives because those wouldn't be our greatest amount. So let's look at the 2 positive numbers. Which one's greater? Now in terms of money, this is like having $8.76 because the 9 rounds that up. This is like having $8.90, all right? So of course the better amount to have is the $8.90. So we're going to put 8.9 as our greatest amount. And our next greatest amount is 8 759 thousandths. Now, this usually tricks kids. They usually think, oh, this number is bigger than this number because look, it's got the longer decimal. It's 759. This is just 9. But don't forget, we can add zeros behind the 9 so that it matches the 3 numbers behind the decimal like this number. And it's really 900 and this is 759. So really this is larger than this one. But of course in terms of money, 890 is larger than 876. So this is larger than that number. Now, this is the tricky part. Which of these negatives is the best? Because we're going from best to worst, right? So out of these 3 negatives, which one's the best? It's not negative 12 because remember, think about owing money. This is like you owe $12. This is like you owe $1.99. This is like you owe $7.20. So if we're going from the best amount to the worst amount, the greatest, the best negative is actually the one that is the smallest because the less you owe, the better. So this is the best negative. Okay, the next best negative would be the negative 7 2/10. And of course, the worst, the least amount you could have is if you owed $12.01. That would be the least amount you would have because that's the most money you would owe. So here, that one would be the least amount because it's the most you would owe. So this is the best amount, this is the worst amount.